Mazamuno or Maza is a digital artist that blends both cute and dark elements in a unique and captivating way. I'm also amazed by Maza's use of colors, shading, rendering, and the outfit designs. That's why I wanted to study Maza's art, and in today's video I would like to share what I learned from this. We'll go over different elements the art is made up of in the analysis part and combine all of this when drawing an illustration afterwards. Now let's start with the first element, the lines. Maza uses clear line art with varying line thickness. The silhouette lines or lines that are in shadow tend to be thicker, while the inner lines are thinner, especially around accessories and small patterns. The lines are very thin. Some lines for the clothes transition slightly into fold lines as well. The hairlines can transition into the hair shading. These lines tend to have a lighter brown color or are colored slightly darker than the flat color around them. Some lines have a bit less opacity, blending softly into the surrounding colors, which gives a softer look. For backgrounds, when there are fully painted scenes, lines are used as well. These do not have as much varying line thickness as the characters and are generally thinner. The characters Maza draws are around 7 heads tall. They have a rather slim build, but the proportions can vary depending on the character. The characters tend to have realistic, cute, slightly idealized proportions. Male characters can be more muscular, while female characters may have more body fat. The detailed shading of the anatomy especially stands out in Mazamuno's art. The body looks quite realistic with soft shading. For example, more shading is added around the knees, and highlights are often added to the shoulders and thighs. Some characters also have a more androgynous appearance. Overall, the limbs are rather slim and include tapering. Hands are portrayed as cute and realistic with thinner fingers and detailed shading. Necks also fit the character style. Female ones are slightly thinner, while male characters have wider necks. Overall, the necks are relatively wide, making the characters appear more adult, while the general proportions make the characters look softer. The face shape is generally rounded. The chin may be pointier for female characters and wider and more rounded for male characters. The facial features are placed at around equal distances except the chin, which is usually a bit higher. The upper part of the head tends to be slightly longer, extending the distance between features. For female characters, the upper part may be a bit lower, making the facial features appear further down on the face. Male characters tend to have slightly longer faces, while female ones are wider. The lower jaw is wider with fuller cheeks for female characters, while for males they are slimmer and thinner. The lower jaw is rounded, meaning the change of direction there is less distinctly visible. In the 3/4 view, the jaw outline for the inner side of the face can also blend more into the face color, making it less distinctly visible. For side profiles, the nose and lower part of the face appear more forward than the upper part. Now let's talk about the facial features, starting with the nose. Noses are mainly portrayed with one line and some light above it, along with a triangular shadow around this line. The shadow, and especially the light on the nose, tends to give it dimension. For some male characters, the nose may be portrayed with either 2 nostrils and a line or just a longer line. Light and shadows are always added here, making the nose appear a bit larger. In the side view, the nose has a slightly rounded, bigger shape that transitions into the face shape. Mouths are portrayed with a darker line, often accompanied by small visible lips. They are relatively small, giving the characters a cute appearance. The mouths are often expressive and open, featuring small teeth, sometimes including fangs. Tongues are frequently depicted, and piercings are often added in various parts of the characters' illustrations. A small shadow is often added under the mouth. It's very subtle, but gives the chin and mouth more definition. The inner parts of the mouth are portrayed with a white shape to depict the teeth, which are sometimes shaded in detail, just like the inner parts of the mouth. Moving on to the eyebrows, they are usually thin and come in various lengths depending on the character. They tend to have a more straight shape rather than rounded. The neutral angle of the eyebrows often gives characters a soft, innocent expression, which can contrast with more expressive mouths. Generally, the eyebrows are quite light, which adds to the cute appearance of the characters' faces. Now let's talk about the part that tends to make every artist very unique, the eyes. The eyes are positioned slightly below the middle of the head. They have an almond-like shape, with some being more rounded and others more narrow and straight, giving them a slightly rectangular appearance. Female or younger characters generally have taller, more rounded eyes, while male or older characters have more narrow, rectangular shapes. In the side view, the eyes tend to appear more triangular. The inner part of the eyes does not have any lined parts. The upper eyelid line is thicker, while the lower one is slightly thinner, with a small gap often present at the lower right edge. The eye lines tend to thicken toward the top and outer right corner. The eye outline line frequently includes several lashes. At times, the lashes transition from the white of the eyes into the lash line. Lashes are most commonly added along the lower eyelid, with 2 to 4 placed here. For some characters, 3 large lashes are added to the upper eyelid on the outer side, and 2 lashes are sometimes added to the inner side. Lashes are shaded in a detailed way, giving them depth. There is a line above the eye that follows the shape. For some characters it is longer, and it sometimes overlaps with a smaller inner line, making it look like 2 lines above the eye. This line can also be thicker on the inner side of the eyes and tends to transition slightly into the skin color. The iris has a circular, rounded shape and is rather tall, especially for larger eyes. The iris outline is thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom and may sometimes blend slightly into the lash line. The lower part of the iris outline also occasionally transitions into the white of the eye. Here are layers I would use to create an eye shading result. Similar to Mazamuno's eye shading, I would start with a base layer. Next would be a circular shadow under the upper lash, and finally we have a layer for small lights. The pupil usually has a small dark circular shape or a larger colored circular shape with a gradient that matches the eye colors. As for the highlights that are added to the eye, these could be one large round shape in the iris that transitions into the white of the eye, or they could be portrayed using several smaller shapes. A highlight is often placed above the pupil at the lash line. Sometimes highlights are also added above the eyelash on the skin or other parts of the lash. Shadows usually appear below the upper eyelid, sometimes with a soft transition. The darkest shadow is around the eye outline, which is often reddish or pinkish. This is not always present, but often draws more attention to the eyes. Other facial shadows can be caused by lighting and may appear on the face shape, along with blush. Blush is usually added and can vary from a less intense to a more intense pink gradient that covers the cheeks and nose or just the cheeks. Lines may also be added to the cheeks. Almost all characters have the most saturated areas around the mouth, cheeks and eyes. Now we're moving on to another aspect that can be very unique to each artist, the hair. The hairline art focuses on the silhouette with varying line thickness. Outer lines are dark brown or black, while inner lines can be colored. Inner lines for the hairline often transition into the hair shading, which we'll talk about next. Hair shading includes many shapes that follow the lighting direction and the shape of the hair. There are zigzag shapes, slight gradients, and blended edges. Here are layers I would use to create a hair shading result similar to Mazamuno's art. First we have a base layer, then a layer for regular shadows, next a layer for darker shadows, after this a layer for the darkest shadow, then I would add a layer for highlights. These are not always added, sometimes they are more like reflected light. The highlights overall can be soft or have sharp zigzaggy or blocky shapes. The eyes are only slightly visible underneath the hair. The clothes have thicker lines for silhouettes and thinner lines for folds. Fold lines often transition into the clothes shading. Other than for the silhouette, there aren't many clothes lines and inner lines are sometimes colored. Fold lines are often incomplete and they have triangular or rounded shapes as well as many zigzag shapes. The clothing aesthetic is a mix of kawaii, goth or scene styles. Many details and accessories are added. Common clothing pieces include oversized sweaters, ruffles, straps and silver jewelry. These outfit parts are shaded differently according to their material, and the detailed and intricate patterns make the outfits stand out. The color palette often includes pastel, bright neon colors like pink or purple combined with either black or white or both, as well as some silver, sometimes only neon colors with some black and white or just pastel colors or a mix of both are used. The color scheme reflects a pastel goth aesthetic, partly cute and partly dark. The colors themselves tend to add most of the contrast, while the shading does not, which brings us to the shading next. The shading does not add much contrast, the colors used are not too dark. Shading usually includes both soft shapes and sharp ones. Gradients are added at times to create a smooth transition between light and dark areas. There is a lot of hue variation and soft glows are often added to give depth and vibrancy. In some illustrations, colorful shadow borders are added, though they are not always heavily saturated. The layers I would use for a shading result similar to Mazamuno would include: first would be a layer for the base, next would be a first shadow layer for a lighter shadow, then we have a second shadow layer for a darker shadow, finally we have a layer for light which can include highlights and reflective light. The process I use for each color here would be to first block in the base colors and then create clipping layers for each shading color to refine the shading. To achieve this effect, I would use a combination of a lasso selection tool to select shapes and blend the edges, or simply paint in some shapes directly. For the backgrounds, Maza often uses a flat color that is arranged with borders, rectangles, patterns, or props like floating plants or ribbons. In other illustrations, full scenes like rooms are painted in, but they tend to be slightly out of focus to draw more attention to the character. These scenes often have lines around them, just like the props. The many props fitting to the character and the overall illustration, often including sweets or plushies, tend to have a kawaii aesthetic. The illustrations can feature a scene, goth, internet, digital, or Y2K aesthetic with elements added accordingly as well. The props and patterns add a dynamic element to the illustration often, and they can be shaded as well. Now, after the analysis part, I will apply the elements we talked about in my own illustration. For this, I will draw my OC Yumari, who I have also drawn for many of my previous art style analysis videos. We start with the sketch. Here I started with the head and shoulders. I then made my sketch smaller to add in the rest of the body until the start of the thighs to make sure the overall alignments of the body parts would work. After this, I sketched the head using the proportions as mentioned in the analysis. I also added some edgy teeth and multiple lashes for the features. For example, I tried out a few options for the mouth, open and closed, and went with a slightly open one in the end. Afterwards, I moved on to the hair. I used long, flowy, sharp shapes here. Next, I adjusted the head a bit. I had one version of the chin being further down and another one of it being higher up. After the head, I moved on to the body, then the hand. I first drew in some guidelines for this and then added the fingers on top. I also thought of the fingers or hand holding something, so I experimented with this as well. Next, I sketched in the outfit. For this, I like to go off of Yumari's initial outfit and adjust it to make it fit more to the clothes the artist draws. Here I added some ruffles and many moon-themed elements. I added several accessoires on the hand and hair as well. After this, I sketched in a background. I had the idea of adding several moon or star-shaped elements. I then adjusted the head and outfit a bit and moved on to the line art. I started with the head. After this, I added a bit more varying line thickness to the hair specifically. Then I drew in the body and hand. The hand pose was particularly tricky to me for some reason, especially figuring out what and how many lines to use for the inner part of the hands, the fingers alignment and the nails, especially for the point finger. After the hand, I moved on to the outfit, starting with the bigger parts and then the ruffles. Since a lot of the accessoires are attached to the bigger parts, it makes sense for me to draw in these first. I blocked in some colors, mainly to adjust things. I wasn't sure what lines to use for the nose, for example. After this, I finally drew in all the accessoires. I used a pattern brush I created a long time ago to add in some chain-like accessoires here as well. Drawing in all the small details took some time, but it was very enjoyable. The same is the case for the background as well. I even reused some parts from old illustrations here and implemented them. Using references from Pinterest helped a lot to come up with and refine the details of the elements I added on the character and in the background here. After all of this, the line art stage was finished and I moved on to filling in the colors after erasing all overlapping line art. Going through all the details while doing this took some time, and after this I used the color palette systems from my analysis to adjust the base colors and determine the shadow colors. Then I renamed the colors and the layers fitting to this. After this I started shading. I go through the layer groups from bottom to top for this. First would be the skin group. Since Maza uses detailed shading for the anatomy, it was good for me to start with this to make sure this would work as a base for the entire shading. After this I moved on to the eyes. When shading the lashes I was a bit unsure if I should make them white like in Yumari's initial design or if I should make them black, since Maza often draws just black eyelashes, which is why I shaded both versions of the lashes. Next it was time for the hair. Here I started with lasso selecting shapes. Afterwards I also painted a lot of them in, still having mainly zigzaggy shapes with some soft gradients as well. Now we take a short break from the shading. I filled in the colors for the background next. Here I also determined I would like to use a white border in the background. Then I continued with the shading for the clothes. Here adding in the small shadows on the belts was a bit tedious, but I like how much it helped to make the clothes look more believable. In a similar way I left the outlines of the accessoires to have no shadows for it to create a more 3D-like feel. I continued shading the clothes, making sure to add the shadow 1, shadow 2 and light layer for each color. I also added different kinds of shading for the metal and fabric parts here to convey their differences in the material. The silver and bright turquoise parts here would be more shiny than the frills on the clothes, for example. After I was done with shading the body, I moved onto the background shading. For the elements here, I wanted to use softer shading to draw less focus to them, to make the character stand out more from them like this. To convey some shininess, I added a bright outline on the background elements. Finally, I combined the background elements and the characters. When seeing them together, I adjusted the background elements, especially color-wise. The dark line art around the background elements was bothering me, especially as I didn't want there to be too much contrast in the background. As final adjustments, I then added a white outline around Yumari, a pattern using a shape from Yumari's second outfit design, as well as small dark particles. I also added a small white outline around some metal star constellation parts, as these did not stand out enough from the character to me at first. Then I colored the line art using duplicated copies of my color layer group, and I added reflections for the eye. Like this, the illustration was finished. I was done with the adjustment stage. Let's move on to my reflections on this study. Hopefully what I share here can be of help to you and gives you something to think about. You can share your thoughts on these aspects in the comments as well. First, I determined some differences between Mazas and my art. I turned my art into grayscale along with Maza's artworks, while the overall contrast aligns with the artworks that feature brighter palettes in Maza's art. I saw that in my artwork the lines are rather dark and add a lot of contrast, whereas for Maza's artworks they tend to be more soft and brighter, especially for the artworks with brighter palettes. My art looks more sharp and not as soft and cohesive due to this. It also takes away some focus from the face. In Maza's brighter artworks, the eyes tend to be the most defined and darkest part in the illustration. For my artwork of Yumari, the hair and outfit or bodyline art distracts from this. A reason why this happened may also be due to my painting process. I do the line art as a separate step before shading or rendering. If I used a more painterly approach that combined both lines with rendering, that could lead to a more similar result. Painting over the lines at the end to make them appear softer could also be a solution here, and that's actually what I did to see how this would change the artwork, and it did help with making my artwork of Yumari look more similar to Maza's art. I also realized here that some of my lines just were too thick before this painting over step I added. As another difference, I would also mention the hand. I spent a lot of time rendering it and painted over it multiple times since I was unhappy with how it looked. It still looks too wide and not as elegant as the hands in Maza's artworks to me. Finally, a difference for the background. Something I noticed about Maza's art was that gradients are often used for the background. My artwork of Yumari only had a pastel purple color as background. Combined with Yumari's white hair, this made the upper part of the illustration not have that much contrast. Due to this, I also added a white gradient to the background color here. Next we move on to some of my learnings. First we have the power of analogous color schemes or using one dominant color in an artwork. Maza's art often has pink, purple or blue as a main color, and this makes the art look more cohesive and soft. Using this hue in different value or saturation levels then helps to draw attention to different parts as well as adding black or white. Next I would add adding details. These make Maza's art stand out especially. Small accessoires, props and patterns are something that help to convey a specific mood, atmosphere and theme. Like this, your eyes can discover all kinds of different small elements while looking around the artwork. It's fun in a way and makes you look at the art for a longer time. Implementing this by first focusing on the general idea, pose and cut of outfit parts, and then adding all of these elements would be an approach I would take to implement this in my own way as well. For this, it's good to ask yourself what the artwork is about and what elements can be added to convey this. And a side note, normally I only draw one basic body for my art style studies, since I find Maza's anatomy rendering especially interesting and I had multiple ideas for outfits. I decided to draw in two versions here. To still save some time and not have to redraw everything, I tried out using Krita's transform masks. It was challenging to figure out how I could use that tool to basically copy and paste the drawn in outfit parts so they matched the different proportions, but in the end it worked out and it saved me some time. I may also be able to use this learning for future projects, which is nice. And for any Krita users, I can recommend experimenting a bit with features like these. Maybe I'll share some more specific Krita tips and advice on tools that I have learned over time in a future video. You can tell me if you'd be interested in that. Then what I would take from this learning as a more general concept for all artists would be asking yourself, is there some tool that could help me save time, as well as trying out new things for your process from time to time? It can help you develop and improve. I hope that mentioning this was insightful and inspiring to you. That concludes my style study of Mazamunos art. Which part did you find most interesting and helpful? Let me know your feedback in the comments. I'll leave links to Maza's art in the video description. Feel free to check it out. Hopefully watching this video was as enjoyable to you as it was for me to do this study. I'm very grateful for Maza's art and getting to learn from it. If you'd like to see longer screen recorded process videos of my art, for example from the basic body or head I included in this video, you can find that on my Patreon, along with some time lapses and full resolution images of my art. Thank you for watching, have a nice day and bye.